In the latest video, we spoke about the fact that Mercury has no atmosphere and why that is important. But it turned out that some things that were thought to be part of its atmosphere actually are. You can welcome back to another episode of What on Earth. Today we will try to find out why Mercury is leaking metal into space. Back in 2017, NASA launched the Messenger spacecraft to study Mercury, and while it was orbiting the planet, it made a startling discovery. In a single day, it observed how the planet lost almost 200 tons of sodium. This isn't much when it comes to Earth standards, but for a planet as small as Mercury, this is quite a lot. Moreover, Messenger had already noticed similar things happening with other elements like potassium and even hydrogen. So, what is going on? Why does Mercury keep losing so much of its surface material? And most importantly, where does it all go? We don't know the exact answer to these questions yet, but scientists have a few guesses. And one of them might explain why the planet has no atmosphere. To understand what is happening, we need to look at Mercury's surface. It looks pretty ordinary from a distance, but up close we can see that it is covered in strange patterns, craters, and cliffs. The patterns are called grabens, and they are formed by tectonic plates moving apart and pulling the crust with them. They are mostly filled with volcanic materials that were pushed up from inside the planet, such as this huge area called the Caloris Basin. Now, Mercury is unique because it's the smallest planet in the solar system, so that makes it very, very dense, more dense than even Earth. And Mercury's core takes up around 85% of its radius. And this is important because just like Earth, Mercury's core is surrounded by a mantle and a crust. And just like Earth, the material from the core can sometimes make its way up through the mantle and the crust, creating all sorts of interesting geological features. For example, there are mysterious holes that are only found on Mercury. No other planet has anything like them. They are called simple sprytes and complex sprytes. Simple sprytes are holes that look like they were punched into Mercury's surface. They are almost perfectly round, and some of them have even been dated to be less than 100 million years old. Scientists think that they are formed by material from deep inside the planet, making its way up to the surface. Just imagine the pressure hundreds of kilometers below Mercury's surface. The temperatures reach thousands of degrees, and when the hot material finally makes it to the cold surface, it condenses and evaporates just like water vapor on a cool bit of glass. This forms a gas bubble that expands until it blows the surface apart. The second type of hole, the complex spires, are much more irregular in shape, and scientists think that they are formed by different processes. So why are we talking about these holes? Well, it turns out that many of them emit sodium and other metals into space. Mercury's surface is full of sodium. There are huge deposits of it spread all over the planet, which means that somehow it managed to get there. And since we haven't seen any sodium-rich asteroids crashing into Mercury recently, it must have come from within. Now, here's where those spires come in. When Messenger orbited Mercury, it found that many of the hollows were emitting sodium and other metals such as potassium, calcium, and magnesium. The thing is, these metals don't exist in their pure form on the surface. Instead, they are compounds, oxides, and silicates. So to turn them into free metals, you need to heat them up to very high temperatures, which means they must originate from Mercury's hot core. But wait, this doesn't make sense. How could Mercury's core release sodium without melting the entire planet? Well, Mercury is very weird. Not only is it extremely dense, but it also has an unusually thick crust. Crusts usually make up less than a few dozen kilometers of a planet's radius. But Mercury's crust is between 400 and 600 kilometers thick. One theory says that the core is actually a liquid, which would explain why it's able to move around so easily, and why it's not completely depleted of sodium after all this time. The problem is that no one knows exactly what's going on inside Mercury. And we don't even know if the planet has a liquid core at all. We can't drill inside it because it's way too hard, even for the best drills we have on Earth. Plus, Mercury is constantly bombarded with solar wind, which makes its surface electrically charged. These charged particles often get trapped inside cracks, and Mercury's magnetic field channels them right into the crust. So it is possible that the electric currents created by the solar wind somehow interact with Mercury's core and help the metals escape. But if the core is solid, then it's likely that it's just extremely hot. The temperature at its boundary with the mantle reaches around 3,000 degrees Celsius. At that point, It's so hot that it starts to break down rocks and release all sorts of materials that are normally locked inside. And once they get to the surface, they are quickly blown away by the solar wind, which creates Mercury's mysterious exosphere. An exosphere is a very thin atmosphere, and it is basically the outermost layer of a planet's atmosphere. It's so thin, in fact, that you can't really call it a gas since the molecules are so far apart. They behave more like a cloud of particles drifting in space. And it turned out that Mercury does have an exosphere of sorts, but it's not at all what scientists expected. They thought that it should contain materials that evaporate directly from the surface. Things like sodium, potassium, and even gold. But the exosphere they detected contained mostly oxygen, along with some sodium and hydrogen. Where did the oxygen come from? Well, it could have been produced by solar wind hitting Mercury's surface. If that's the case, then this means that Mercury has an atmosphere of sorts, but it's not made of material from its interior. Instead, it's made of stuff coming from outer space. This would explain why it is so thin. All those metals that were emitted from the inside of Mercury simply got blown away by the solar wind. This is very unfortunate because studying the composition of Mercury's atmosphere could tell us a lot about its interior. But now we will have to wait for another spacecraft to arrive and collect samples before we can figure out what is really going on. We don't know much about Mercury. Despite being the closest planet to the Sun, we only began exploring it in the last century or so. There are so many mysteries left to solve, such as why does Mercury spin so weirdly? It rotates 3 times slower than Earth, despite having no atmosphere to slow it down. And we still don't know what's inside its core. Maybe one day we will find answers to all of these questions. But for now, we can be satisfied with the fact that Mercury keeps surprising us. If you enjoyed this video, you might like our video about Venus's atmosphere. Check it out. Thank you for watching.